Hi, it's your girl Narice, and it's 2 days until the Infatuate World of Neptune EP is released, and I am so excited. Um, there's a few things that I wanted to discuss and get on here, and talk about leading up to the official release. Um, yeah, so there's that. Um, But first and foremost, before I get into that, I'll just give a quick synopsis for those who don't know who I am. Hi, my name is Narice. I am originally from Jersey, and I am a singer, songwriter, producer, visual artist, um, lover of fashion, and express myself through the arts. And I also like to proclaim the fact that I am a truth teller, like many Aquarians are. And a lot of times I'll get on here and live stream and discuss pop culture events and things that's happening in the world and share my perspectives and opinions, as well as things going on in my own life. And you may notice that there might be some things a little bit different with this platform. So, I am going to continue to do live streams from time to time when I feel so inclined to. However, I am transferring some of the live streams onto Patreon, which was something that I was already doing like last year when I was consistently live streaming, when I was doing Music Mondays, Tone Tuesday, Wave Wednesday, and Fire Friday and whatnot. And most of those live streams were me live streaming, of course, while I was creating music. So while I was making beats or recording vocals, and there were a few times where I was live streaming and I did like some visual creative process projects and showed you guys the creative process. And so there's kind of like two worlds. And then there's a lot of times where I'll get on here and I just share my perspectives and opinions and talk about the events of the world. So with that said, um I will eventually like update and decide whether I'll link those Patreons on here. Um but yeah, one Patreon is a little bit more like, again, about the stuff going on in the world, and plus my ideas about like conspiracy theories as well as certain events that's going on in my own life. Of course, for entertainment purposes, allegedly. Um, and then there will be another live stream specifically for things showing the creative process, showing me, like I said before, like making the beats, um, writing the songs. Well, I don't really show people like writing the songs, but recording the vocals, recording the harmonies, and engineering the music and all of that, right? So there's that. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the EP, right? So for those who don't know, I already had an EP um that I put out in 2020, which was called Divine originally. And it's the same songs that for this EP that's being re-released in the next 2 days. Um yeah, so it's same songs. It's just different aesthetics, different visuals, definitely like a update and just like better aesthetics, essentially. Better aesthetics, a better vibe, um, visually, and some of the song titles were changed as well, just to kind of like fit the whole like sequence of what the project is. So it's now abbreviation IWON. Um, but the long title is Infatuate World of Neptune. Or you can call it the Neptune EP or IWON EP. whatever, however you want to title it, that's the vibe. So yeah, that's essentially what that is. Same songs. So even if you're watching on YouTube now, and on my page, if you go to releases, it'll say Divine there. But eventually I will add the I1 project, and then that'll be up there. So you can look forward to that. But if you follow me on TikTok, and if you follow me on TikTok, on X, on Instagram, I'm posting on there too, mostly on TikTok. And yeah, I give, updates on everything that's going on as it pertains to the music and whatnot. So there's that. Now, I haven't done one of these in a while. Having certain points that I wanted to address and communicate and whatnot. So, one of the songs on the project is called Alumni. And I titled that song Alumni because there was an experience in my life. Sorry, I'm just like looking at the clouds up here. I don't know if that's distracting or not, but I was dealing with a situation in my life where I was having a hard time with some folks who were friends of mine at the time. And, when you're younger, most of the friends that you make are usually from school, right? And this was like after college. I had dropped out after my freshman year, but some of my friends were still in school. And there was a period of time where I was just like, drifting apart and falling out for whatever reason. There was a lot of confusion at the time. There wasn't a lot of like transparent communication as to what people's problems were, even though I had repeatedly tried to address certain things and fix myself and, change and, contort my whole like being to like fit into these people's lives because I cared about them. These were loved ones of mine, and and I truly cared about these individuals. But Alumni is the one song on the project where I kind of like hold space for my frustration. A lot of the songs are like upbeat or like love songs, even if it's not upbeat, like now entitled Off Star, but you can just say Star. It was originally called Divine. That's a love song. It's a ballad though, but for the most part, it's a song about love. And a majority of the songs on that project are about love and friendship or, self-love. And I'll even say like Just Wanna is more so about like unrequited love, but most of the songs stem from the feeling of adornment. And Alumni is the one song I feel like is the most honest song um that highlighted kind of like the troubles and the struggles that I was going through at that time. And you know, I kind of wanted to do like a breakdown as it pertains to what all I was feeling at that time, and then just kind of like how I feel things reflect in life, and just like the nuanced experiences that I've had in my experience, just like as a Black woman in this company in this country, America, right? And of course, there's all the sirens and noises in the background. This is why I couldn't live in New York, because this would go on a lot. And mind you, it don't be that much going on around here. It don't. I feel like they just be, you know, like, oh, we got to get through the traffic sign. But anyway, so first and foremost, as it pertains to education, like I said, I dropped out of college. However, I don't claim to be like the smartest person ever. But I am intelligent, and I am aware of things in the world, and I like to be a student of life. and I like to have a fair balance of street smarts as well as book smarts. And I'm get slowly but surely like getting back into like more educational things in my life, like as it pertains to like trying to read more, being better about literacy, as well as like just like even like financial things, like paying attention to the stock market. And that is an avenue that has kind of like inspired me to read more and to read more articles and be aware of what's happening in the economy and how it's affecting society and also how it's affecting my stocks, you know. Um, and may I bless it that it goes up with the right investments, and then when it's down, I, you know, able to get in the game and at a decent price. Um, but with that said, you know, I had people in my life that were obviously like more educated than me. And that was cool. And I was here for that. Um, you know, I celebrated that. And what I say in the song, you know, is like, you know, you can take your degrees and your alumni family and spies since y'all been through everything. Um, you know, and at that time I was just having like all these realizations of, you know, the illusions around my life just slowly but surely starting to fall. You know, it's entitled Infatuate World of Neptune because Neptune is known as a planet of like mystery and illusions and dreams and such. So a lot of times the things that we are um, inundated with and succumb to, that we see on a day-to-day basis sometimes can be a facade. And I speak to the facade of the infatuation that I was feeling at the time, which inspired a lot of the songs, as well as the things that were going on around my life. So if you see the updated cover, there's kind of like this like holographic, um, like reflective color scheme, as well as like this elements of like blue red, which is kind of reminiscent of the blue pill red pill from the Matrix. And then just kind of like highlighting this like illusionary world that I was living in at the time. And you know, there's a lot of symbolism in terms of the location because the picture is taken at my house in my backyard with the shed, um which, you know, there's a lot with that. But that's beside the point. So, with that said, you know, I always wanted to be someone that was like studious and, you know, someone that can say, "Oh, this statistic and you know, this, you know, I was reading this study and God is the king of the power and the glory, rebuking all the negativity." And God bless whoever that might be for. Um, anyway, so you know, I've always kind of wanted to be that kind of a person, and like I like partially am, but not exactly. Because I don't know, when I think of my experience as a Black woman in America, I feel like I'm somewhere in between uh like the hood or like suburban experience, whatever that is. You know, because there was a period of time where early on in my youth I went to a predominantly Black school, and then towards the end of middle school into high school I went to a predominantly white school. And then at one time when I was hanging out with my like friends from my Black school, not Black school, but it just so happened to be predominantly Black, they would say like, "Oh girl, you talk white." You know, like, you know, I've had that whole like, "Oh, you were Oreo" thing. I've had that experience. um And the funny thing is, when I was going to high school, like with the majority white folks, I still was myself. Like I talked like me, you know, like I talk like how I talk when I'm by myself in the world is like talking to your homegirl. Like, girl, that's so crazy. Like, child, that's wild, you know. But at the same time, like I can code switch. Like I know how to be, um, you know, verbally intellectual, when necessary. And, you know, when I was going to a predominantly white school, when I was hanging with my friends, I wouldn't do all that. I would talk to them like how I would talk to anybody, really. But, when I was in class and, paying attention and during serious discussions or even a part of the debate club, um, I knew how to, you know, speak appropriately and such. So, yeah, and I was never like ashamed of that. That was never something that made me feel like, oh, I don't belong. And I think maybe not until like later on in life, like as an adult now, um, you know, just because like lately I've been in like this weird limbo space in the world of like in the physical world years ago, back when, I didn't know as much, but I was in technically a higher position of power, um, on paper. I had management positions. I was a supervisor for a period of time working in retail. I've been an assistant manager running a store, and I've done different like types of gigs with entrepreneurship, and some unsuccessful, and some, I would have moments where I would, work really hard and like outwork the people I was working with. So like I've had different moments of like um higher responsibility. And lately in the last few years, there's just been a lot of revelations in my life where I've been on this spiritual journey. I guess that's the easiest way to describe it. And have evolved a lot. Um and I guess learned or am learning of my spiritual authority and the power that I have spiritually versus what it looks like in this physical world of like working in management or working in corporate. I even worked in corporate for a period of time too. I was a secretary. That's not like a high position or whatever, but like I was commuting to New York every day, and it was a full-time job, and I had benefits, and it on paper, and by the standards of society, it would appear to be like a higher position of power versus me, like just working a retail job or whatever. And as of late, in the last few years, I haven't had, uh, and mind you, when I had these jobs and positions, like I would I've oftentimes I've had the critique of being overdressed, and being overly like professional, where I was working a retail job and I would be like dressed up all the time. And when I was working my corporate job as a secretary, like the dress code was very laid back, but I was working at a fashion institution. And for me, like I said, I'm a lover of fashion. And so I was like, oh, this is my opportunity. I get to wear I get to wear my dresses and pencil skirts and blazers and everything. And then like where my office was, like my office manager and everything was just like, wearing denim. And I was like, you don't have to wear all that. And I'm just like, and mind you, I was so excited because I've always wanted that like corporate experience of like, being business professional, not even business casual. Like I could do business casual in my sleep, but like dressing up with the heels and the blazer and everything like that and the pearls. Like I was so excited for that, just to be in a space where it's like, okay, you don't have to do all that. And I'm like, but this is a fashion school, but whatever. Anyway, and now I'm in a point in my life where um, you know, I don't have to technically meet that standard. I'm working for myself right now. I've been really like just honed in and committed to my music and my art. Cause like the last few weeks I've been like traveling on the road and just trying to like find my way. And I hadn't really been as focused on the music. Um, I've just been focusing on like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I'm just kind of like just trying to figure my life out beyond, being New York. Being the girl from New Jersey, working in New York, and from a small town, the girl from around the way, but really just figuring out who I am in this world and what my place in this world is. And, as well as like revelations of um, who I really am and the truth of me, and as well as the revealing of certain narratives that's been placed on me, or certain life paths that I've been placed on, versus the truth of who I know myself to be in my soul, but then also discovering the power within my soul. I don't know, it's like a weird space. It's a weird space to be in, of like knowing who I am and knowing what I want to be, versus knowing what people want me to be and what people want to deem me as. And then also still learning so much about myself, and learning about, just the power of being, or having Black girl magic. And then also being in spaces in a world where people know that you have Black girl magic, know of your magic, and use your magic, but don't empower you to have your magic work for you and be empowered to find your own position of power through your Black girl magic or whatever. So that's kind of like been my experience lately. And then through that journey, it's inspired me to update this project. And so, getting back into the music was exciting for me because I just needed that drive. And the thing is, like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's not that I don't have work ethic. I feel like it's easy for me to enter an establishment and be efficient in another space, and versus like being a startup and building something for myself from the ground up, and especially as a one woman show, and really doing it on my own. And of course, like, I've had help along the way, and then people try to infiltrate and tell you like how to write your song or how to sing your song or whatever. And those experiences are annoying, but that's a part of the process, right? That happens when you're working with a team and working with people, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And or maybe it's good for a period of time, and then you got to switch it up a bit. It's all a part of the journey, is what I'm learning. And so with that said, I was inspired to update this project and change the aesthetics to what I feel like is a better stylistic and aesthetic representation of myself, versus like the eye that, you know, people wanted to, you know, put on me at the time. And, it's not necessarily like a bad thing, but more so like it just wasn't true to me. It wasn't authentic to me. Um, and I guess you risk that when collaborating with people, right? But I'm grateful that this time around I have a more authentic expression of myself through the art. And I feel like the visual aesthetics is more true to who I am and how I see myself, and how I want to present myself as a creative, as a musician, and then also as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, and as someone who owns my own, publishing and masters, and essentially my own label, and what that looks like and how my creative eye looks, as well as the freedom to express myself without other people like trying to hang over my head and, say, oh, you should do it like this or you should do it like that or whatever. But really, expressing it from me. And then, then also, I don't know, maybe like the destiny, or a manifest destiny, not exactly, but kind of, or just like for those who believe in like oracles of like, this is what your life is supposed to be. This is what this is what the title of your project is supposed to be at this time or whatever. Okay. Um, you know, if you're into like fortune telling, I don't know, maybe in someone's fortune, it was supposed to be like this, entitled like this, or whatever the case may be. And fine, so be it. Either way, I'm really like proud of how it's progressed. And I'm proud of where it is right now. And to be able to do this re-release from, a better expression of myself creatively, visually. The music is still the same. It's just, the packaging and the rollout had to be upgraded and amplified and just like refined to a better space. So yeah, excuse me, hello burp. Um so yeah, that's a little bit of the like behind the scenes of that project, right? And so, some of the like challenges that I had along the way was just like, just like collaborating with other people. And then even within that collaboration, it just made me think of different experiences that I've had through the years. Like I was saying, like in my workspaces. Um, and like, specifically as it pertains to like, collaborating and working with women, right? Because my experience is a little unique. I didn't grow up with my mom. I did grow up with my cousin, like towards like my teenage like years, but for like the beginnings of my like childhood, there was a gap where I was like going through puberty, like those pivotal moments in adolescence where it would be, you know, advantageous to have the guidance of a woman, and that void just wasn't filled in my life. And there was a lot of like, things that I was learning or trying to learn through trial and error, and um just mistakes, um and just trying to figure out like, how to deal with a period, um dealing with your body changing and whatnot. um And so I was used to like being comfortable around guys because I grew up with my brother and my dad. And my brother's friends would hang out at the house a lot of the times. And I would just kind of like be like, little sis Reese, like there, chilling with all the guys, right? And but the thing is like it's not like I didn't have like girlfriends. Like I had like a group of girls who were my friends like in each space, like in each school. Like I always had like a best friend that was a female, or like in one middle school, like there was a group of us. There was like four of us that were friends. Um and and we all like looked out for one another. And then even all the way up until like high school, I went to an all girls school. So, there's a part of me that like still connects and resonates with women. And also like, you know, the relationships of women and sisterhood is important to me. And you know, it's interesting because like the type of content that I will watch, I guess I've realized, there's a lot of like male centered content or whatever. And I guess for me, like even when I was younger, I would watch movies and I would gear more towards like action movies or like really either like action films, like gangster movies. Well, not a whole lot, but and a lot of times me and my brother, we used to watch a lot of horror movies back in the day, or just like really like intense like philosophical or drama, more than just like rom-coms. And I didn't get into rom-coms until later in my life, where I was just like I was aware of this and was actively like trying to be open to more like feminine like content and just overall vibes, just like finding my own style and energy like in these last like few years, just finding my like aesthetic and femininity. So, you know, as it pertains to women, I will say that there had been like certain moments in my life where, I definitely was like supported by women and, um, empowered by women. And I value those relationships in my life and I value those moments. Um, and there were definitely times where there might have been like, rifts or like misunderstandings and stuff like that, especially as it pertains to like body image, and like comparison and stuff like that, because I had always been petite, right? And for a long time, like I was insecure about it. And now like not so much. Like I've just kind of gotten used to it. And I know like I think it's normal to not always like everything about yourself. Like, like say, okay, like say if you want to lose a little weight here or gain a little weight here or whatever. Like, I wouldn't mind if I gained weight, but if I don't, it is what it is. Like, I still love myself regardless. And, I know that there's parts of me that, like, okay, maybe isn't my favorite part of my like body, but there are parts of my body that I am confident about. And, that I know when I like dress myself well, it makes me, I feel good about myself, and so, I've had like different, I guess, moments in life. I feel like naturally when you're younger, when you compare yourself to women and maybe somebody has a different body type than you, or maybe you wish you were more like a muscular build, or you wish you were more curvy or whatever it is, right? And especially in today's day and age, even though I feel like it's a shift, but I would say definitely in like the 2010s, there was this like heavy push to have like the like hourglass, Coke bottle shape body, right? With curves and everything. And I did a live stream talking about this. Well, not really. It was more so some clips on TikTok that I didn't post. But if my life were like the Truman Show, just maybe the hackers put it out there. And I talked about just like kind of leaning into like conspiracy theory, right? Just like body image and how I feel like there's an agenda to, kind of like have us all like be enamored by derrieres. And so there's a lot of nuance with that conversation, right? For one, I mean, yeah, it was prevalent in media and in music and videos and everybody getting BBLs and stuff like that, right? And the thing is, even though from my perspective, just because I have a small following here, I hadn't really like seen much like direct, you know, impact from that. But that message was very general. Now there was like, certain moments and certain things that I may have seen on social media that, inspired it or, may have crossed my mind as it pertains to the conversation. But like, it wasn't like it was directed at any like one particular person. It was a very general message. And anything that I was, attacking really was just like the overall movement of why this is so pushed in the media. Like, what's the agenda? And that's usually my stance when I have these live streams. Like, okay, there are times where I directly be like, going for particular people, but in that particular conversation, it was a very general message, right? And and again, a criticism of the agenda, just because I feel like there's always a deeper thing going on. I feel like there's always like, even if it seems innocent to the people who are like, for example, like if you have like a public figure that is using their content and, has a certain image. Even though the image and their intentions may be one thing, I feel like there's, always like a bigger power, a bigger conglomerate that can utilize that for something different. So it's not necessarily an attack on a person, but more so an attack on the agenda that can manipulate the intentions of the original intentions of whatever that person was doing in whatever, whether it's, I don't know, a music video or a fashion ad or whatever it is, as it pertains to like, BBL culture and bodies, right? Right. So, you know, I say that to say, the thing that um bothers me is, you know, I mean, it's an ongoing thing that has been bothering me for a while. And I've discussed it a lot recently, but just like the notion of us like being so quick to attack one another before there's confirmation of offense or before there's even like a conversation of clarity, and I think it's interesting how it's, especially when it comes to like women against women, there's always that like idea that like women don't get along or women are catty or whatever. And that can be true, but that can be true about men too. And that's just normal about people, because sometimes you gel well with people and then sometimes you don't. And for me, like, even with the issues I've had with women in my life and relationships with women, my default will always be to support women, period. Whether I know them or not, whether I feel like for so long we have all been at the bottom of the totem pole, and I don't care to kick someone down. If I can support someone, then so be it, unless they give me a reason not to, and it's legitimate and it's like direct. But for me, when I was having that conversation, it was a very general thing, and more so like not even just talking about public figures, but just like everyday people, everyday people that just kind of like put themselves out there and, and join these like movements without even really understanding how they're being used as a pawn and really how they're, pimping themselves out. That's more my beef than it is with like people in position of power. Um, because that's something I see on the daily. I see that in my actual exchanges, like out and about, interacting with people in real life. That's more my beef of that experience, as it pertains to how reality can be shaped around us based on these agendas that are being pushed versus, a reality that we want to create for ourselves where we just accept our bodies and show love to one another, and and even if there's issues, have clear communication, and address them. Now, I do feel like there are times where people jump the gun on certain things, and maybe there isn't a conversation, or maybe there's like, because like there's sometimes where like, say if there's something that I want to talk about, and or maybe something that other people want me to talk about and I don't, mainly because I feel like I don't need to, or because like, not that I in some instances don't need to, but just like because what I said may not have anything to do with, whoever may feel away, and I guess like it is important for clarity, but at the same time, you know, when you have like when there's so much going on in your life, and like I said, like with just like the everyday interactions that I have with people, and just like my everyday just like navigating society, that's a main priority for me, rather than like clarifying, something that wasn't that serious to me, or but at the same time, it's like it's not my intentions to offend people. you know Sometimes that happens, when I'm saying something that can be a little bit transparent and uncomfortable to hear, but true. And again, even though it's not my intentions to offend, like my beef will always be with the agenda. And so like it does bother me a lot, um when I feel like people jump the gun about certain things, and will react prior to there being you know confirmation. And then also, like, how people go about reacting, it's just like, okay, because sometimes, like, I feel like people will blow things out of proportion without even like fully understanding the scope of things. And my thing is like, well, damn, okay, I understand if you feel away, right? People are entitled to how they feel, especially if there's miscommunication, or if they feel like, like, say, even with the whole conversation that's happening right now with like Cardi B talking about overweight people, and like, people feeling triggered and calling her out or whatever. you know like, people are entitled to feel how they feel, but I feel like, attacking someone prior to having that confirmation is a bit um ridiculous. I mean, I don't have a better word. I don't have a better word for it. And that's just true. And for me, like, my thing is like, okay, if this is how like people would react with situations that aren't confirmed, you know, then how do you react when things are confirmed? And my thing is like, and again, like, the thing is not a beef specifically with like women as it pertains to this conversation around like body positivity and like criticizing bodies and whatnot, right? Is not My beef isn't with women, it's with the agenda, especially when it's women that I know, I feel, take a stand and are in support, and have been in support of other women, or like, what I've seen in my own life, and women that have taken a stand and been in support of me, and I'm always grateful for that. And I don't take that for granted. It's just the miscommunication, and how that blows out of proportion, and you know how that can like, I'm trying to find a way to say this. You know, Again, the point that I was reiterating, that I addressed before and I'm addressing again, is like communication, and how I feel like as a society, I don't know, maybe it's my own experience, maybe it's just something that I have dealt with a lot, but you know, I feel like I've seen too many instances where people just attack without really letting someone, have a fair chance of sharing their side, or addressing certain things, or just speaking their truth. I feel like there's been certain you know messages ingrained in society, especially as it pertains to certain like people and demographics, where we're just like conditioned to attack before like having a conversation, or even getting all the facts and receipts and everything, right? And that's my issue with society. That's my issue with culture. And I feel like it's a problem that should be addressed respectfully. And I say that for myself because, like, I can easily be enraged. Not really, not, well, depending. I don't want to say that like easily, but like, you know, and I say that versus like being like scared and paranoid. Like, there's times where I have to like let me calm down and just really assess how I want to handle the situation because like, you know, I don't want to just lash out, even though I feel sometimes justified to do so, especially in situations where I know the treatment that I received wasn't warranted versus what can have been perceived as the offense. You know, I think like, so even if like in an instance, if I was, being direct and directly being antagonistic and offensive intentionally, I feel like there's instances where like, you know, even in that, even in that situation, if it was direct and intentional like attack and shade, there's been times where I've received like a barrage of attacks that I don't feel meets or is even like equates to the original thing that may have been said that could have been perceived as an attack. And I feel like as a society, it's like easy to just continue to do this, especially when you have certain like topics or people that are seen as like a punching bag until they punch back. And then it's like, oh my God, like, all hysteria, but it's like, why are we so comfortable doing that? Why are we so comfortable just automatically just being like, okay, gloves off, guns blazing, hit below the belt as a solution? And then in some instances, you deal with attacks and don't even know where the source of the attack is. So it's just like, okay, it wasn't even a matter of like, okay, maybe this is like a lesson learned type of thing. It was just like, no, just the like blatant attack, you know? And that's what I have an issue with. Especially like when you're dealing with like bringing it back to like the work example, like if you're dealing with people in positions of power, because the thing is like when I was younger, I used to look up to celebrities mainly because like I wanted to be a celebrity. And not for the sake of like being famous, but because I wanted to be a successful artist and be known for the art and my creativity. And I knew that I had the talent to do so. And I knew that I can be in those spaces with the big names and the people, the superstars and the people up there that we all look up to, I guess. Um and then like in recent years, like funny enough how I was saying like, you know, when I was younger, I was like technically like more professional or in more professional positions of power as it pertains to the physical reality. As it pertains now, where things are a little different, where like, okay, sure, I might not have a traditional job right now, but I've been on this spiritual journey where I've been learning how to navigate my spiritual authority and spiritual power and not abusing that like other people do. Um and and now, even though like my physical reality might not have matched when I was like an assistant manager at this store and, wearing heels and a blazer to work every day. With a different perspective and understanding about life, I'm not fazed by the glitz and glam anymore. I'm not fazed by a name or, you know, or someone that may be perceived as more powerful. And I don't say that in a way to be like I don't respect those people. It's just like that's not something that phases me anymore. You know? Like, even though my outer physical reality doesn't look like it, but I know I can be in those spaces with those people energetically. And I'm not scared or, or intimidated. However, I'm not irrational at the same time. And I feel that way because I've been through so much through these years and I've overcome more than most can deal with and still overcoming. And, in instances where I've had several instances where I've learned about people that I once looked up to that were in positions of power, or maybe I aspired to rub elbows with, um, you know, where I may have you know, been not fearful, but just oh my God, it's this person, you know. Now, I don't care about that because I'm we all people on this planet, maybe. Um, However, you know, yeah, I've been through so much where it's just that doesn't wow me anymore. And a lot of times, the thing is, it's easy to protest and say, for example, if you want to bring it to politics, say if there's a politician that you don't agree with their politics for whatever reason, and you speak out against it, and it's easy to say these things on social media and whatnot, versus face to face. My thing is I don't care about that. Um, I mean, okay, all right. Because again, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. My whole thing is look, I think I'm bold enough to call the system out when they're wrong, you know, and especially when you have people that have really good images and there's you know a solid reputation and legacy, and for that, I respect that and what it stands for, depending, especially as a Black woman, and when it comes to the Black community, when we have leaders that I feel the symbol of people in certain positions of power is important as something for people to look up to and aspire to be, and to see oh wow, somebody did that, maybe I could do that, you know however, I do feel at the same time, to get to these positions of power, there's things that goes on that is flawed, is a flawed system. And there's things that people, I feel, have to do to get to high positions of power that interfere with, their integrity. And when those things happen, we should be able to call it out. And especially when it directly affects us and our communities and our country. And and I'm grateful for the people who do speak out and hold those things accountable in the times that, like, especially as it pertains to women's rights and Black women, because I'll always, stand for Black women, especially when it comes to like the younger generation and, you know, what they're doing with their platforms and even like the older generation. But like these things have to be addressed. Like, why is it so easy for us to just resort to attack prior to there being like any like confirmation of potential issues, or when we see, you know, less than dignified actions, like what are we doing to correct that? And I mean, and in some instances there has been motion and movement to correct it. And when I see those things in our communities, like, I'm proud of that. And grateful that there's people even having that conversation and bringing it to the forefront to even care. Because, like, for example, it's like, say in instances where you have someone like Eric Garner, who unfortunately passed away due to police brutality, and there's some people who even try to justify it and say, oh, but he was trying to sell cigarettes outside the store. Okay, but that doesn't warrant him, being choked to death. Like, okay, sure. But even still, why is it an issue that he's selling cigarettes outside the store? Maybe he's doing what he needs to do to feed his family. But that's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother tangent. And anyway, um, yeah, that my point in all of this is that where I really hope in me doing these videos and these live streams that, like, and I struggle with this myself, so I know I'm not perfect with this, and I've this challenge has even risen up in my own life, but I hope that with my voice, regardless of how people feel about me, whether you like me or not, that we can shift culture to a space where, instead of, just outright attacking people before getting the facts and the receipts, or, attacking people based on like hearsay and gossip and drama, and attacking people for whatever, that there's communication, and it's fair communication, because I feel like a lot of the issues that I've had to deal with in the last few years of my life stemmed from there being perceptions of me and not having the fair opportunity to not only share my story, share my side, but then also get to like defend myself and just deal with situations where I'm being attacked and judged and having these narratives placed on me. And I don't even know why. But I just know, you know, after the fact, after being attacked, after there's already being issues. And, when those things happen, that's the thing that is a sure way to have me lose my cool and not care. Because I'm like, clearly people aren't caring to be fair and caring for my own like well-being, to even give me the fairness of having a conversation. But there's like already subscribed narratives like, oh no, this person is this and this person is that, and go and attack them. And it's like, how do you even know? And even if like there's like some type of inclining or like like a showing of a thing, okay, but that's not confirmed though. And it's like, why do we resort to like just like outright attacking each other and selling each other out prior to discussing things, and then when there's retaliation, people are surprised. And for me, in like certain instances in my life now, I'm really trying to do the work to not react that way, and then have an understanding of who all that, if I did react that way, who all that would affect, right? And if we want to bring it back to the conversation around like women's rights, like if there's discrepancies against women, understanding that that can affect a whole nother generation. And I want to be mindful of that, because I think it's important for the next generation to do better than the previous generation. And I'm saying that in a very general way, because that's also another argument that I've been making for a long time in a very general sense. Where I feel like there's a lot of instances where like previous generations judge like millennials and younger for how we go about life, but the systems that were in place when they were able to succeed in life isn't what it is today, or their systems are problematic, because it's like, why are y'all operating like that? Why is this how situations are handled? Like, for example, in a very minor way, um, like smoking indoors, right? Okay, that could be problematic. You know, once learning, like, okay, this is an issue, we do better. But there was a generation where people were doing that everywhere. People were, smoking in restaurants, smoking, and then I remember my dad telling me when he was young, when he was a kid, he used to go buy cigarettes for his parents, and the store would sell it to him. Now, of course, you got to get ID'd for that. But there was one point in, a previous generation where that was just acceptable, right? But of course, when we know better, we do better. Um, and as it pertains to like generations, like the example that I really wanted to speak to is just like, okay, like the housing market and livable wages, right? I feel like it was easier for people with like regular jobs to be able to buy a home and like create a family and a life for themselves. And people wonder why, like, okay, why is the, fertility rate going down? One, because who can afford to have a family? Unless you're rich in a position of power. But like the everyday person that's like out here in the trenches just trying to make it, they're not thinking about having kids. They're thinking about how I'm going to make it, because most people like my age and my demographic and just going through similar experiences are figuring out like, how are we going to pay these bills? How am I covering my apartment? And then a lot of times people got to room with other people, or you got to work like 2, 3 jobs. And I've done that. I've worked several jobs, and I knew like when I moved out, I don't want to live with people, but I don't know who's to say they might not let me be alone, because they have to monitor my life. But who is they? Of course, the Truman Show people. But anyway, um, and it's just like these are things that I'm kind of like all over the place with this, but these are topics that I wanted to discuss just as it pertains to society and just like issues. Um, you know, this might seem like a tangent, but it'll be a full circle moment, because my issue, or the thing that I was discussing, is just like nuanced issues, you know with one, like my experience as a Black woman in this country, and then also just the issues within our community and how we handle issues. And, like as much as I love the experience of being a Black woman in Black culture, there's discrepancies with our culture and through all classes and all generations, and I feel like a lot of it stems from slavery, specifically as it pertains to the experience of being a Black American, um, an African American, um, and slavery. And a lot of times, because in recent history and even current history, when we think about the mistreatment of Black people, a lot of times we think of, you know, the racism experience of, white folks perpetually attacking and harassing Black people. And that is true. And the white people who brought us over here from Africa. And, but we don't talk enough about the people who, the Africans, Black Africans, that sold us out in the first place and gave us to the white man to be pimped out and such. And, you know, unfortunately, I feel like there's instances where that still happens today. And where, to get ahead, to get to positions of power, you know, because of these atrocious systems that very few have the courage to stand up to, we go along with doing things that sells our own people out, you know, whether it's and it doesn't matter like how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into the thing that makes you great, whether it's your, academic standing and degrees and education or community work or, doing different initiatives that helps you build your position in leadership, you know, to some degree, there's disparaging things that are done at the detriment of our own community. And in some instances, I understand when you're like, say, if you're new to a space and it's kind of like fraternities, right? Where you got that year of hazing to like, be accepted to be the new person in, right? So you gotta certain shit you gotta do that you may not want to do or whatever. But you feel like, oh, but this is the thing that works. This is what's gonna get me ahead. But once I'm in the group, then I'll have these connections and I'll, and that's what everybody does, right? Everybody does these weird little ritual things, right? Okay. That I can understand a little bit. But then it gets to a point where it's like, all right, after you're in the door and the system is fucked up, especially the system that was built off the backs of, Black folks who were unfairly treated as well as unfairly criminalized. If we want to talk about the 13th Amendment and the loophole that was once slavery was abolished and people in position of power is like, all right, how we going to get, how we going to keep the structure of having Black folks work for free? And, oh, let's make them criminals, even if we got to bullshit the crimes, right? People in position of power know that. People with the access to the most information know that, right? At least that's what I'm assuming. I'm like, look, if you making the laws, somebody back there got to know the playbook and what's really going on. So if we know that there's Black people being unjustifiably criminalized intentionally for free labor so they can give their blood, sweat, and tears to help elevate these people in positions of power, if we want to talk about private prisons and that structure, when do we get to a point where we're like, okay, this system is fucked up, what are we going to do to change it? And yes, what's the risk that is going to be to stand up against it? Yeah, it's a risk. But so was the fight for civil rights. People risk their lives for that. Unfortunately, there were so many assassinations at that time. But that was a fight worth fighting for, because it was an awareness of a flawed system that was disparaging to Black people in the Black community. So kind of bringing it back to another point as it pertains to like women's rights, again, not to directly attack and criticize women, but when are we going to stand up and say, you know what? I don't need the BBL to be seen as beautiful. Let's challenge the system that's making us feel like we have to do this. That's my argument. That's my stance. And, and I will say, if it appeared to be an attack, that's not what that was. And for the miscommunication, that I apologize for. However, I don't apologize for the initial message and ultimately the point that I was trying to make, which is, again, a criticism on the agenda and the people pushing these movements. Now, my criticism is on the lack of communication and how us as a community oftentimes attack each other without there being communication or even just like a check and balance system within our own community. And it falls back into upholding and perpetuating and essentially being pieces on the chessboard for these flawed systems. Like me or not, and you don't have to, that's okay. And if you don't, I'd appreciate if you act like that all the way through. And this is a very general message to society, because I know there's people who get on here and watch and, they don't like me, but they care to see what I'm going to say, if it fits the script of the Truman Show, or, or maybe I might say something that might actually compel people to, like, I don't know, challenge these fucked up systems. But that's beside the point. It's not beside the point. That is the point. That is the point. Like me or not, that's where it forces me to beg, like, the question of, like, what exactly are we standing for? It's like, are we standing up against a flawed system, or are we just, allowing ego to have us justifiably attack one another because it might be like popular, because it's like, oh, okay, this narrative is being pushed now, even though we know it's bullshit. But because this narrative is being pushed and we might have some, grievances that way, we'll jump in on the dog piling. And unfortunately, I feel like we do that too much as a community when we're all being played. Especially when people in lower positions are doing the work for people in positions of power and not nearly getting a fraction of the compensation of these people in positions of power. Now, it's one thing if these people in positions of power are helping you, but if they're benefiting off people in lower positions just doing all the dirty work for them, doing all the janitorial work, you're not getting compensated like these people in positions of power that own the company. So exactly, like, what are you working for? What do you stand for? You might say to yourself like, oh, this is like a honorable job. And again, this is nothing against people who do custodian work, but I'm saying like in certain instances when we're working for structures and corporate spaces with unjust systems. Like, you work in a building, yeah, you might have a job, and the person that's giving you the orders is like this high, named person, a position of power that's respected, and it's like, okay, I got to do this job, but the mission statement is flawed because somehow, some way, in the midst of the mission, there's things that challenge that system, and y'all try to use that as a tactic. Like, for example, like, say if there's, I don't know, like toxic cleaning products, and there's a module or a webinar or a video that discusses that these products are toxic and have been for a while, and we knew these things were toxic, but y'all will have images of the webinar throughout the building and then like joke about it, but then still be using the toxic products, knowing that they're toxic. It'd be different if the person, the janitor, didn't know, but they know. They know it's BS. So, what are we fighting for? What are we actually fighting for? Aside from the fact that people maybe just enjoy throwing around their power in ways that are excessive and unfair. Because, and I'll just like conclude on this part. I feel like me or not, I try my best to be fair. I really do. Even to people that I feel like maybe I shouldn't be fair. you know, in instances where I feel like people have like hurt me and betrayed me and whatever. And maybe in those instances, I'm not saying I'm perfect. In some instances, I may have made a mistake, or I may have done something that prompted them or gave them the motive to like, treat me less than I deserve, right? Okay, fine. But in them treating me less than I deserve, it's just certain lines are being crossed there, right? I, even in receiving the unfair treatment, I try to like have compassion and understanding of the other person's perspective. And I'm like, okay, even though I don't fuck with this and I don't agree with this and I feel like this is unjustified, let me at least try to play God's advocate and understand maybe where they might be coming from. And even in trying to be understanding in that way, I still feel like it's unjustified, but at least I try. At least I try to have that understanding. And what bothers me is that I feel like people don't have that consideration for me in certain instances, right? I feel like people don't even care to hear my perspective or understand my point. And then even in like understanding and hearing, it's like, oh, this talking point was from here, or this talking point was, and then like, okay. And even in that, even if you want to like criticize the like certain talking points, like say if you see an issue on social media and you just repeat that point, right? Okay, you can argue the same thing for the reason why you're upset with that person. You know, like, okay, say you're upset at me for doing this. I can argue, well, the thing that you're upset about me for is something that happened over here. So why are you not upset at that? I don't know. That's a tangent, and that's beside the point. Anyway, a lot of this, and I say all this to say, you know, these are just certain things that I've recognized in society from my own experience of my lived experience as a Black woman in America, in this country, you know, of the USA. Even though, you know, it can be a bit interesting to say the least. You know, a lot of this was stuff that I was feeling and experiencing, one, when writing my project. And honestly, quiet as it's kept, the fact that Infatuate World of Neptune has majority positive songs rather than a whole EP of alumni is a testament to how I really try my best to heal and fix these problems rather than perpetuate the drama. But, you know, in some instances, people thrive off of that drama. They thrive off of the chaos. And sometimes they need you to be the punching bag to justify, you know, their ego and wanting to constantly attack. You know, quite frankly, knowing what I know now and everything that I've been through these years, if I was being like true to my feelings and true to, you know, just like, I mean, it was kind of hard to decipher at the time because like I was going through it in real time. But if I was being like, if I had the discernment to recognize like who was really for me and who wasn't at the time, the EP should have been full of alumni. It should have been like a 10-song project of alumni just going in on people. But because I really care to fix these problems and be the bigger person and even address my own flaws and address my mistakes and a lot of times over apologize and, you know, try to like, I don't know, like prove to people that, you know, I want to be a part of the friendship and relationship and the family and all these things. You know, the EP, really, for those who may not have listened to it, you know, I mean, it's originally titled Divine. So, you know, if you're watching on YouTube, if you go to releases, or if you know, if I ran into you at some point and you know, follow me on social media and you're watching this live stream, hold on, honey. I'll let you go back there in a moment, but I need you to chill here. Sorry, I'm with my little fur ball right now. You know, or you know, say if you want to support the project, right? If you're watching this, if you're in the Maryland area, I could probably sell you a physical copy. I have CDs, I have flash drives. That's my money, you know. Shout out to Abundance. I got flash drives. I have 2 left right now, green and orange. Interesting, you know, kind of gives like pumpkin colors. Don't know if that's intentional. Um, but as it pertains to like me having it left. And then I also have CDs, right? These are the vintage Divine CDs. The Divine EP is what it is right now, but it's changing to, you know, I would say listen to the project. You can listen to it on YouTube, on Bandcamp for now until I get it on streaming platforms. But everything that I'm saying in this live stream, you know, is a testament to either things that I've experienced leading up to me creating this project, and then things that I've experienced in the last 5 years that prompted me to wanting to change this project. But if you listen to the songs, right, and fine, if you want to like analyze the lyrics and find deeper meanings, I mean, sure, you'll probably find stuff there that I didn't intend or whatever. But all in all, just on the surface of if you listen to the project and recognize where I'm addressing reference of things, the majority of the songs spoke to love. It spoke just feel like you know, wanting to like please people, like, you know, friends. I mean, now Mascara first titled song on that project. Space Mascara. Mirror is originally a song about, you know, it can be seen as a love song, but it's originally a song about self-love and me. You know, you want to put on mascara, fix your hair up right, make sure the outfit is fitting on hips tight. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a bodycon fit. You know, I do love my shape, and I accentuate it, and I'm confident in doing so, and I'm not ashamed of it. So yeah, I do like the mascara, and I do like to wear things that are a little fitted tight. Because if you got the body to, why not? You know, and if you're confident and you know and you're comfortable with yourself, then I'm here for it. But for me, it's like a little bit more than that. Because at the time, you know, I was a little bit more insecure. Now I'm confident in who I am, and I'm confident in what I stand for, and I'm confident in my beauty inside and out. And the point in that was a message to myself, like, you know, you don't have to fit people's beauty standards, you know, kind of going along with that whole conversation around the BBL thing. You know, there was so much at the time, you know, because I'm pretty sure that I wrote that song around like 2018. Um, you know, but there was so much in media that was slim, thick BBLs, right? You know, felt like a long time like, okay, that, you know, that's what people to push, you know. That's what other people were trying to like push on to me, you know. And even if it was, oh girl, you need to like, you know, gain a little weight, like other thing. I don't mind that. Whatever, that's fine. Clear the frequencies. And then also let me clear my eyelid. Um, you know, because I mean I've heard that in my family because I was always the smallest one. And you know, people are like, oh, you need to gain weight, you need to eat a sandwich and this and that, which is cool. You know, I've heard that a lot, and I was like, whatever. But then it gets to a point where it's like, look, I've done all that and still haven't gained any weight. And quite frankly, you know, in this infatuate world of Neptune, it just so happens that, you know, it's just an illusion of needing to, you know, I don't know, my struggle with weight or whatever. And this whole illusion of like wanting to look like people who, you know, have maybe done work to look like that. Um, and maybe that's not the true version of themselves. But either way, I wrote Mascara about self-love. And I know that was a tangent there, but my main point is that it's a song about, you know, self-love, and it can also be seen as a love song. But a majority of the songs on this project are upbeat, positive songs about friendship, love, and you know, and the one song where it could be like sad girl vibes, emo vibes, alumni, you know, that's like the most transparent song, quite frankly. Because at that time when I wrote these songs, after surviving my, unalive attempt, um, you know, I was really pushing to work through these issues in these relationships. You know, this was after like a lot of those situations had like fallen apart. And, and I was showing up for people, and even like fresh out the hospital, like just showing folks like, look, I want to be a better friend. I want to show up for you. I want to like prove to you that I'm willing to do the work, whatever the issue is that people weren't voicing to me. I want to fix it. I want to heal it. And I was doing that work, on my own without people, being transparent with me. And this project is a testament to that. This project shows, like, even a song like Run, speaking to, friendship and, like, and people that I knew for a long time, and just like knowing, like, whatever a tough situation it is, we can get through it. The project is a testament to, like, really my heart and its truest nature. And like, yeah, there's one song where I'm like going off about it and, frustrated about like the shortcomings of these relationships. But the fact that there's four other songs speaking about love and, like, not wanting to like bother, just want to, is converse. I say, I keep it coy because I don't want to annoy you. But saying like, I'm reserved. I don't, try to like approach or like, flirt or whatever the case may be, because it's like, I don't want to rub that person the wrong way. And, but just even being considerate in that way is a testament to who I am. Now things have changed a lot since then, which is hence the rebrand, right? And quite frankly, I could write a whole EP of alumni. But my whole point is that, through these experiences and just like, the things that's going on in society as it pertains to women's rights, as it pertains to being um over the um slavery, and recognize spiritual power aside from perceived power from physical reality of like, oh, being the president of a company, whatever, but real like power of your spirit and power of your soul, and reach stuff, and not letting people take that, and not letting people, you know, try to tell you who you are. Like all of these things, all of these talking points and things that I discussed in this live stream, all of that affected why I felt it was necessary for me to rebrand and update this project, right? And then just like even the whole thing around like body positivity and women's rights, like a lot of that really stems from like the conversation and, you know, also hack you and, make for a lot of people's problems or whatever. But I feel like if we can just like challenge each other to actually like want to do the work and, be honest and transparent with one another, um and actually, and even if like things are shady, and even if we disagree, and even if like, all right, things are said that can be seen as offensive, all right, fine. But in some instances, it doesn't warrant the attack that I feel like we just jump into doing. I feel like people are just like, oh, we're in position. Oh, this person's walking by. So you know, let's make sure we crash this and bang this noise. And, and like all of that is just like pathetic, and it's like, I feel like as it pertains to like that conversation around generations, I commend the younger generation of challenging, things that were done previously, and people who just went along with stuff and did nothing to change it and did nothing to, challenge the system. Now that, certain things that was ingrained into the culture, into media, into the arts, say 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago,